Hey there, it's me, Brett Fish, and thank you for watching this video. This is episode number 14, and so hopefully we are at the point where we can tackle a phrase or an idea that makes a lot of people uncomfortable and even has many people disengaging before the conversation can even begin. That's right, it's time for us to talk about white privilege. So what do we mean when we talk about white privilege? And maybe one of the best ways to get there is by looking at what we don't mean, because when I speak about white privilege, two of the things that people respond with the most are this idea that I was born poor and I worked hard to get everything that I have. And this idea of white privilege is saying those two things aren't true. And it's not about that at all. And maybe the word privilege in there confuses us. The idea of privilege is of getting things, of not having to work hard. But once we put the term white privilege together, then what we are suggesting is that you may have had hardships in your life. It may not have been easy. You may have worked hard for everything that you have. But your color, your whiteness, is not what made your life hard. And so when I think of what white privilege is, it's the set of unearned benefits that I got in life, unearned access or ease of life that I got purely based on the fact that I'm white. And if we look at it the other way, we can look at the lives of black, colored and Indian people in South Africa and say that we can trace many of the injustices that happened to them, both in the past and in many cases today, to the fact that their skin was black or brown. And so when we talk about white privilege, we're saying we got to avoid that stuff based purely on the luck of the fact that our skin is white. It's not because I worked hard or because I tried or because I was more capable. It's simply because my skin was white, this thing was given to me. And maybe one of the easiest ways to kind of understand it, there's a lot of pictures and analogies that help us understand the term. I'm going to share some of them with you in this video, but one of them is to look at this idea of being able-bodied and look at white privilege through that lens. So I've got a friend whose name is Yuel Marie, and a number of years ago he had an unfortunate diving accident that left him partially paralyzed and spending most of his time in bed, but when he goes out he's in a wheelchair. And so this idea of able-bodied privilege is the idea that if Yuel has a meeting in Cape Town and it's on the 7th floor of a building, he may not be able to get to the meeting because that building has not been planned for wheelchairs. It doesn't have wheelchair access. For me, I would be able to go to the building and I'd be able to use the stairs or the lift and I would be able to go to a meeting on the 7th floor. I never have to think about going to a meeting in town wondering if I'll be able to get access. And so that is able-bodied privilege. Because my body is abled, I don't have to think about things that disabled people have to think of. And so maybe that helps to make white privilege a little bit more clear, that there's certain things in life that are a little bit easier, a little bit more achievable, a little bit more accessible, simply because I'm white. And maybe you can start to think, what might some of those things be? Let me share two other stories that will hopefully give you a picture of what white privilege might look like. If you think of two university students starting university on the same day, they're both studying exactly the same thing. One is black and one is white. The white person came from the suburbs and they very likely had their own bedroom. They had peace and quiet when they wanted to study. They likely had both their parents, of whom one or both may have had a job, 3 meals a day. They probably had connection to the internet, and if not, if the internet was down, they would have a parent or a neighbor or a friend or uncle who would be able to drive them to the local library where they'd have access to information. And so those are just some of a very generalized picture of what somebody who grows up in the suburbs, their life might look like. Now, if we look at the black student as somebody who grew up in a township, there might be a large number of them living in a very small building. There might be 1 room or 2 rooms in total in which everybody lives and sleeps and baths. They might not have access to 3 meals a day. They might have to spend a lot of their day looking after younger siblings because their mom might have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to take 3 modes of transport to go and be able to clean maybe the white student's house, or to be able to go look after the white student's siblings. There's a lot of noise because they live in very close proximity to their neighbors. They might even have to go outside to use the toilet. It might be 500 meters away from their house, and it might be a toilet that is shared with 500 other families. There might be violence in the vicinity. There might be police sirens. There might be a lot of distraction. It might be really cold. And during the day, when the sun is beating, it might be really hot. And they don't have access to the internet. They might have issues with data. They might not have a great connection, if they have any connection at all. And so when we look at the lives of those two, which are two average students in South Africa, an average white suburb student and an average black township student, they both arrive at university on the same day. You might look at it from the outside and say they've both made it in the same way. They're equal. But they both took very different paths to get there. The black student has had to overcome so much more just to make it to the same starting line. And after a couple of weeks at university, the black student might show that they're struggling. And you might look and think they're lazy, or they're not trying as hard, or they're not as clever. But it's because they've had to face so much more. They've got so many more obstacles. They've got so many things counting against them just to arrive at the same place. The second example that helps illustrate white privilege very well to me, I think, is the idea of movies or the media. And we can think of movies and TV and advertisements. But imagine when I watched a movie growing up, I could watch something like Indiana Jones and see myself, someone who looked like me, represented me as the hero. I could watch a movie where somebody who looked like me, a white person, was an astronaut, or a pilot, or the president, or the love interest, or the leader of the expedition, or the scientist, or the doctor, or the lawyer. In any of the movies I watched, there were typically people that looked like me that represented a whole host or range of things that I could consider. I could do that, I could become that one day, I could look like that. And even to the ridiculous extent that I could watch a movie and the Son of God, according to Christianity, Jesus Christ, born in the Middle East, would be represented by a white person, even though he was very likely a brown person. If I was a black person watching a movie, and I know it's slightly different today, but in the majority of the movies when I was growing up, if I was a black person watching a movie, I could see someone who represented me, who looked like me, as either the bad guy or the help. And that was pretty much it, with a few exceptions. The bad guy, the villain, the drug dealer, the gangster, or the help. And that could be a range of things, from the butler or the maid, all the way down to the servant or the slave. And if I was very lucky, I could be the token black friend killed off in the slasher movie. Representation has been a way in which white privilege is shown. So as a white person, I can see myself represented in 100 different ways, in all the different types of jobs and successes and all the things I want to see. If I'm a black person or a person of color, I will struggle to see myself represented in most TV shows, most media, and in the news. And if I am represented, it's often with a negative light, in a bad way. Can we start to see how this thing of privilege, it's not something that's earned, it's not something that I worked for, it's not something that I attained, it's an unearned privilege, unearned thing that has been given to me based on the luck that I was born white. And so as we start to understand a world in which there's white privilege, it can talk about access to things. It can talk about a lack of suspicion. If I'm walking around in a store, I'm not going to be chased around by security because they think that I'm going to steal something. But I've had a lot of black friends where that's been their experience. In a neighborhood, on a neighborhood neighborhood watch WhatsApp group, they often have special designations for BM, black male, CM, colored male, IM, Indian male. And there's often nothing for white male because white males are not seen as suspicious. I won't be stopped in the neighborhood when I'm walking by somebody who thinks I don't belong there. And so these are just some of the examples of what it looks like in terms of trying to understand what white privilege is. Another example would be a 100-meter race. And for me as a white person, I've got the best shoes on, I've got a clear track ahead of me, and I'm waiting for the starting gun to go. For a black person, They could be wearing some really old shoes, no shoes at all, and in front of them, their track is littered with barbed wire, with hurdles, with obstacles of every type, ditches, water, all these things. And so you say, well, both of you have 100 meters to run, and yet mine is being made so much easier, so much clearer. That is what white privilege is about, and it shows itself up in 100 different ways, and we just need to start having conversations with the people around us to start understanding that white privilege is a thing. And what happens when you have white privilege? Do you have to feel guilty about it? No. The way I see it is like this. The first thing we have to do is recognize it. I can start seeing that in certain places and ways there are things that advantage me that don't advantage my black, colored, and Indian friends. So recognize it. The second thing is acknowledge it. I have to speak it out loud. I have to be okay with saying, I have white privilege. If I go into the bank, I'm more likely to get a loan than my colored friend. White privilege. Recognize and acknowledge. And then the third thing we need to do is leverage it. We can't often get rid of white privilege, but we can use it to help make things more equitable, more equal, more balanced for our friends, for people around us that don't have the privilege. And so that is really what it's about, starting to recognize where you have privilege, and you can use that in circumstances to benefit people that don't. My friend Sean shares this quote, which I think says all that I've been trying to say in a different way, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. It's by somebody called Eric Reitan. Those who experience privilege did not choose to be born into the class that society advantages through systemic forces, and they did not create these forces that advantage them. Furthermore, they have limited power as individuals to change society, and so are unlikely on their own to be able to divest themselves of their privilege. This means that having privilege is not something anyone should feel guilty about. You can't help it. While there are some advantages you can cast off, you can't remove the social forces that give people in your class a systemic advantage. So acknowledging privilege is not about feeling guilty or about casting blame. It is first and foremost about recognizing an inequality in the social structure, and then about making a commitment to working for change as one's life situation allows, and recognizing that having a particular kind of privilege may allow one to work for greater equity. Work for a society in which one no longer experiences this privilege, in ways that those who lack this privilege can't. And that was by Eric Reitan. And then this one from a white mom in America. And she said, to admit white privilege is to admit a stake, however small, in ongoing injustice. It's to see a world different than your previous perception. Acknowledging that your own group enjoys social and economic benefits of systemic racism is frightening and uncomfortable. It leads to hard questions of conscience many of us aren't prepared to face. There's substantial anger at oneself, at the systems of oppression, and mostly at the bearer of bad news, a convenient target of displacement. And that was by Manic Pixie Dream Mama, who is a blogger from the United States. And so there we have it, white privilege. Our role is to start interrogating white privilege. Where do I see it at play? Where can I understand that it has taken place in my life? Recognize it, acknowledge it, and then start leveraging, start using where I have privilege to help level the playing field for those around me. Thanks for watching.